Was what the Kentucky Wildcats baseball team did against the Texas A&M Aggies considered Bush League? Let's talk about it. So last weekend, in a weekend series in the SEC between the Texas A&M Aggies and the Kentucky Wildcats, there was a moment in the series finale that was also the rubber match of the three-game series that caused a stir. Here's the situation. Kentucky was leading Texas A&M 10-5 in the bottom of the eighth inning when at 4:27 p.m. the Kentucky pitcher seemed to have a problem with the pitch comm device, which caused a short delay. Why this is significant is because there is a rule in the NCAA when it comes to baseball where a new inning cannot start after 4:30 based on the travel rules allowing teams to get back home in plenty of time. So it would appear that the Kentucky Wildcats purposely took advantage of this rule in the bottom of the eighth inning, and the whole team literally stood around on the mound for 3 minutes to make sure the bottom of the eighth was going to be the end of the game. And there were 2 outs in the eighth inning, and Aggies manager Michael Early noticed what was happening, and he left the dugout. He didn't go much further beyond his own dugout, but he was shouting at Kentucky head coach Nick Mingione. And there was a shouting match back and forth. Early later called the move Bush League and viewed it as gamesmanship and that they were just trying to play the system. But what doesn't make sense to me about this, and I do think Kentucky was in the wrong here, because there are certain unwritten rules in baseball and certain things you don't do. And I know there are probably people out there, casual baseball fans or whoever, or people that don't even watch baseball that are like, if the rules are unwritten, they don't matter. Who cares about this, about that? But as an avid fan of any sport would know, there are unwritten rules to every sport. We just seem to talk about baseballs more because they're a little bit more obscure, and there seems to be more of them. But every sport has unwritten rules. Like in football, if the game's out of hand and you're the winning team and time is running out, you don't pass the ball. You don't try to run up the score. You don't try to score again. You keep the clock moving. You keep the ball on the ground to the best of your ability. In basketball, you don't dunk in the same situation. You don't, if you're on a breakaway and the game is ending or the clock's running out, you don't dunk or you don't shoot a three as time expires if you're the winning team. Like certain things in certain sports you just don't do. And while this particular thing isn't necessarily an unwritten rule, it certainly feels like one where it's the bottom of the eighth with 2 outs. The game's almost over anyway. You probably won't finish the top of the ninth based on these rules, but you're just playing a game that you don't need to be playing. The stupid thing about this is it was not a close game. Kentucky was up 10-5, and there was nothing on the line. We're talking about a regular season game in April between 2 middle-of-the-road SEC teams, if that. Kentucky ended up winning the game, going to 17-9 on the season. Texas A&M dropped to 13-14. So this was pretty inconsequential. It's not like it was a super regional, and not that it would have been okay then either. But because it was the bottom of the eighth, because it was 2 outs, because it was a 5-run game already, it didn't make sense why they would choose that moment to pull this trick. And I don't blame Texas A&M manager Michael Early for coming out of the dugout and screaming at Kentucky coach Nick Mingione, because I would have done the same thing. I probably would have gotten suspended by the NCAA because I would have gone over to Kentucky's dugout and gotten in Mingione's face because I would really want to know what he was thinking in that situation. With that score, it was the bottom of the eighth. It wasn't like it was the bottom of the fifth with the bases loaded. The whole situation seems unnecessary. As I said, they're 3 outs away from that game ending anyway, up 5 runs. against a team that's not threatening them in the conference. They're 1-8 in the SEC. Texas A&M is. Kentucky's 4-5, so neither one of them are good against good competition. But the whole thing just seemed completely unnecessary. I had forgotten about this rule in NCAA baseball, but then when I thought about it, I realized that I have encountered this rule before. I didn't play college baseball, but at my university, I was around the baseball program a lot, so much so that many of the players considered me an honorary member of the team. I was interviewed on the college pregame show after our manager won his 600th career game. Point is, I was around the program a lot. And there was one particular weekend on a Sunday where the game had started. It was probably the second or third inning, and it started to rain. So nearby, there was a little clubhouse, and it was called the Osprey's Nest because that was the mascot of the school. And you were allowed in certain situations, not all the time, it was usually locked, to hang out in there during a rain delay. And it rained for a couple hours, and we never resumed the game because the rain lasted past 4:30. And I had forgotten that happened until this situation presented itself. But the point being, do I think most of you that watch this video are going to care about SEC college baseball in April and a random weekend in the regular season? No. But the problem with me here, I'd have a problem with this if it was in a super regional, or if it was in a college World Series, or if it was in a close game of any kind. But the fact that this wasn't a close game, the fact that Texas A&M was not a good team, the fact that Kentucky wasn't trying to edge out the best team in the country, they weren't doing this to the likes of Florida or LSU, even though Florida's not having a good season in baseball. They weren't doing this the likes of a good baseball team. They were doing this at the end of a rubber match that was already decided. It was 10-5, bottom of the eighth, 2 outs. And they just didn't want to play the last inning for no real reason. So they pretended, and maybe they had a pitch comm issue. Maybe they did. But the fact that this mound visit lasted 3 minutes, and there are usually rules about mound visits. The fact that this mound visit lasted 3 minutes, the fact that the announcers picked up on it, the opposing manager picked up on it, the cameramen for the game were pointing the camera at the clock on the outfield scoreboard. Everybody knew what was happening. They weren't disguising this well. And so it was clear that they were just trying to end the game in the bottom of the eighth inning. Per the rule, you could finish the inning you're playing, but you don't start a new one. And they just didn't want to play the ninth inning for no real reason. They were up 5 runs. And I think this was a dirty move. I don't think there's been any kind of punishment issued or even a warning issued for Kentucky baseball. But if we start seeing things like this happen in college baseball, it's a real problem, I think. This is, to go back to what Michael Early accused Kentucky of, this is gamesmanship in the worst way. This is, again, and I cannot stress this enough, the game was not in question. They just didn't want to play the last inning. And I think this is an ugly look. I think it was a little bit dirty. Again, they weren't hiding it. Everybody picked up on this. And I think Texas A&M has a right to be angry at the Kentucky Wildcats baseball team. But let me know in the comments what you think about this situation. Do you think it's just part of the game? Do you think the unwritten rules of baseball and things like this are overblown and should be ignored? Or do you think that this was a dirty move by the Kentucky Wildcats baseball team and they should be held accountable in some way? Let us know in the comments. Until next time, I am Roman Gennaro. This is Empire Sports Talk. Today's a good day to go 1-0, and I'll see you on the next one.